We're joined now by Samira Ahmed, who is a journalist and broadcaster who has also presented arts programmes for the BBC. Samira, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
How did you find the event?
I was really impressed by the quality of the questions. I have to say, as someone who isn't a student of politics or economics, there was part of me that was aching to be discussing all the incredible news that's been happening in the world in the last couple of days, and I sort of feel we didn't really quite get there, but if it's what you guys wanted to talk about, I'm happy.
What do you think have been the causes of the sort of anti-globalist sentiment that we've been seeing a lot of in this country recently and in America?
I think in Britain and America there's definitely a nationalistic, I would say sort of male chauvinistic element to it, and actually it's not new. I mean, if you look back at the 1980s and the early 90s, you read a book like Stiffed by Susan Faludi. She looked at how Reaganomics actually had this huge effect on destroying blue-collar male jobs, but somehow it was all blamed on the forces of feminism or immigration. And I think we're seeing a version of that now, which really bothers me. That's Britain and America. I think more broadly, you're seeing nationalistic movements, which are feeding on the same kind of things. You look at India and the kind of Hindu nationalism that Modi is promoting. These are all connected, and cumulatively, I think it's quite terrifying.
In light of that then, what future do you see for globalisation?
Well, it depends how you define globalisation. As a journalist who reports on things, I don't feel I have a right to say where it should go. I'm struck by the fact that if we don't educate ourselves, and if our news coverage and our politicians aren't honest about facts, then we risk a difficult situation getting a lot worse. And I think the way that Britain is trying to grapple with the reality of making Brexit happen is a perfect small-scale illustration of the challenge of something like globalisation, stuff that people vaguely feel they have strong emotions about, but don't actually know the facts about.
Brexit was alluded to repeatedly over the course of the event. What are your thoughts on Brexit as it's happening? Obviously, you mentioned that you like news, so here's a chance to sort of talk about some news as it's unfolding.
Nothing creates more controversy for a person who works as a journalist at the BBC than to offer any opinion on Brexit. So, of course, I have no opinion on Brexit, but I can certainly say, in terms of the news coverage of it, we have this real dilemma. And part of it is that, on the one hand, like climate change, some people argue there's a false equivalence, which is you're putting up people who actually aren't agreeing on the fundamental rules of the game. And I think what's undeniable is that no one knows anything. In the campaign itself for the referendum, all kinds of things were being said by both sides, such as if we vote leave, then the whole British economy is going to collapse, and that hasn't happened. So all I can say is there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of anger by people who feel, what bothers me, I think, is this accusation that if you question anything, you are being unpatriotic, and that somehow this is morally wrong. And I think that's a new thing to me in journalism, that people are questioning journalists' right to question things. So I am concerned, but I think overall we're just trying to find our way into focusing on the facts again. I think that's a good place to start.
And finally, you specialise in the intersection between politics and culture. How do you think the anti-globalisation sentiment will impact on culture in Britain specifically?
I think it's not so much about anti-globalisation. I think there's something about the kind of nationalistic rise which has been affecting British culture. And you see it. I'll tell you what's amazing is you look at something like Downton Abbey, everyone gives that as the example of this nostalgic, very white-dominated, class-based drama that harked back to, well, in my memory of the first big recession in my lifetime, which was the 1981 recession, it was Brideshead Revisited. And I think if you look at so much drama now, and people do talk about it, it's still so dominated by kind of retro, white privileged, historical drama, and we've got to challenge it. But what I will say is, if you want to know where the interesting stuff is happening that is part of social change and part of hopefully forging a more interesting and exciting and freer Britain, you look at arts institutions, you look at the appointment of the guy who's taking over the Young Vic, Kwame Kwei-Armah, you look at all the push for greater diversity in television and the arts that's happening from artists. That's what should be changing Britain for the better. And I think it's a really important part of keeping us sane and focused on the future.
Thank you so much, Samira Ahmed.
My name is Samira Ahmed, and you're listening to Raw.